Hello, my name is Laurel Lindström and I'm the Honorary Secretary of the Authors Club. Welcome to LitFest Online. This is an Authors Club initiative specifically set up to provide a platform for debut novels and novel launches in these very peculiar times. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Robert Webb, whose first novel, Come Again, is published by Canongate. It came out at the end of April. This is Robert's first foray into fiction. So could I ask you, Robert, to give us a quick synopsis of the book and perhaps read a little from it?
Certainly, yes. Thanks for having me. It's, well, we have our heroine, here it is. We have our heroine, Kate Marsden. She's about my age, but younger, about 45, and she's a widow. She lost her husband, Luke, quite recently. They met a long time ago. They met when they were kids, when they were in Freshers Week at the University of York, and they've been together ever since. But Kate is in terrible trouble now. She's grieving. She's not getting better. One day, she wakes up in the wrong room, in the wrong body. She's 18 years old. She remembers everything. She's in 1992. It's her college room in University of York. This was the week, in fact, this was the night that she met Luke for the first time. She knows how he died. She knows he's already ill. She thinks she's there to save him. She's going to try and do everything exactly the same, hence comedy. Because you can't do everything exactly the same. So that's when we first meet her, she's in trouble. So I'll kick off from the very beginning?
Yeah, that would be great. Lovely.
I won't have to do too much awkward contextualizing. Okay, and it's a bit, okay, I'll resist the temptation to do any qualifying. Okay, chapter 1. She woke with her mouth forming a single word, you. This was how they always ended, her dreams of Luke. The details varied, but they would always be alone together in his room back in college. Two people still in their teens, asking their first questions, telling their first jokes. Kate noticed the freckle on her knee showing through his ripped jeans, his ready smile, the way he tilted his head when he listened. The 28-year conversation was a few hours old. This was their first week. This was the beginning. She sat in the little armchair in the corner of his student room, Kurt Cobain watching her with an intelligent smirk from the Nirvana poster on the wall opposite. Below Kurt, sitting on his bed and leaning against the wall, was Luke, similarly slim but darker, unbleached, and with a face that had seen less trouble. He was jiggling his foot off the edge of the bed. Kate had just given him something to jiggle about. I mean, I wouldn't have to take all my clothes off, right? Kate adjusted the A4 pad on her lap and carried on sharpening her pencil. No, of course not. Just slip your shirt off if you like. The trouble is, I'm not good enough to draw clothes. That pajama top would present quite a challenge. She looked up from her pencil and met his mock-insulted gaze. It's not a pajama top, he said, slightly pouting. It's a granddad shirt. Ah, yes, of course, Kate smiled. The blue and grey stripy cotton thing with 4 open buttons at the top that definitely doesn't look like you're wearing pajamas. Luke pinched the top of the shirt to one side and frowned at it. Yes, it's possible, he nodded like a barrister. It's possible that there's a resemblance with... Abruptly, he glanced up at her. Hang on, where did you get that pencil sharpener from? This is my room, isn't it? Kate stopped turning the pencil and took a breath. No, not yet. Let's not wake up yet. The intrusion of logic threatened to end the dream too soon. She felt the beginning of a rise towards consciousness, but resisted it by talking. She wanted to stay right here, in this room, in this moment. She wanted to stay here forever. Oh, it's my pencil sharpener. I carry it around everywhere in case I run into a boy I want to seduce. Luke stopped jiggling his foot. I'm being seduced, am I? Certainly. Why do you think I told you to strip? You don't think I can actually draw, do you? Luke looked around the room with a mixture of surprise and excitement. To be honest, yes, I did think you would at least make a token effort. Kate put the drawing materials to one side and moved over to sit beside him on the bed. And what was going to happen after I'd made a token effort? She ran her hand slowly over the shoulder of his shirt, her fingers tracing the V shape at the top of the buttons down to where they met a sprinkling of chest hair. She knew this body like no other. 19-year-old Luke, Luke in his 20s, Luke in his 30s, and then, halfway through his 40s, he gave her the quizzical smile that always signaled the end of the dream. He said, "What's the matter?" She searched his face helplessly. "You died." He took her hand gently and said, "I know, my love, I know, but you have to wake up. Can't, don't want to. Can't, you can, sweetheart. Rise. Go to the doctor. You're still young. The tumour's tiny now. They can take it out. You can..." "Kate, my love," he said, "it's too late." Luke looked down at their hands. She followed his gaze, down to their wedding rings, and then back up into the eyes of her middle-aged husband. He said, "You're going to be all right, Kate. Come on, you know things. You're the girl from the future." She gently took her hand away and whispered, "I'm not going to be anything like all right. Get some help." "No," she said with certainty. "No one can help me, and I've had enough of the future."
That was lovely. That opening is incredibly sad, really moving and very beautiful. And when I started reading your book, I thought, not sure if I want to read this. But then you very quickly shift into other territories. And I think you do it very, very effectively. You blend love and romance, loss, grief, rebirth, renewal, and you also throw in a bit of subterfuge and danger and violence and even bloodshed. And this all adds up to Come Again a very difficult book to categorize. It's a curious mix. It's a thriller, it's a romance, you've got time travel in there, and you have tragedy. So you completely defy normal categorization for it. So it's not a genre that, there's no obvious genre for it. Was that part of your intention at the start?
No, not really. It's. I mean, it always makes me slightly nervous when people say this. I mean, it's when it reminds me of the bit in Yes, Prime Minister, when Jim Hacker is told that he's being courageous, and that look on his face would go, "Am I? Oh dear!" It's like people say that I've crossed genres. Yeah, I certainly have. It's what is it? It's a grief-stricken, time-traveling rom-com adventure thriller. The first of its kind, but it's really the idea of going back in time. The widow goes back in time, meets future dead husband when he's an annoying teenager. That was the kernel of the idea, and the other stuff, the slightly broader elements, the stuff that we get to mainly in the third part of the book, really just sprang out of what she does for a living. They kind of grew out of the narrative, and I didn't really plan that. I was it's a debut, and I was finding out what sort of novelist I am, and it turns out I ought to be a planner. I wish I had planned it. I don't think it would be a better book, but I think I'd have had a less stressful time in 2018, 2019 going, what happens next? It was really a question of, whenever I got stuck, it was usually the case that I was writing the book that I thought I ought to be writing rather than the one that I would enjoy. And so I just kept going back and to the last time I was actually enjoying it as a reader and took it from there. So at every turn I was writing to please myself. It didn't go absolutely crazy. There was a certain structure to it. There's a certain balance to it, but certainly I didn't worry too much about staying in any particular, grief-stricken sort of genre or romantic comedy of manners type. I didn't mind that. It reminds me a bit. I used to like the band Suede, and there's a quote from Brett, one of Brett's many silly quotes, Brett Anderson, talking about those early singles that they did, and he said what he thinks was original about them was that the band didn't quite know what they were doing in the early days, and I may not be as great a writer as Suede were a pop band, but I think it's a bit like that. I don't quite know what I'm doing, and that's given the book some of its strangeness.
But you not knowing quite what you're doing creates a very powerful voice for the reader, and that's why we read fiction, is to be taken somewhere unexpected and different. So in terms of your process, it sounds like you went back and forth a lot rewriting, and was that difficult to do? Do you have a lot of time that you sort of devote to writing? You got a schedule?
I did devote a lot of time to it. I suppose, off and on, with more off than on, this was the best part of 2 years' work, really. So 2018 was a question of getting that first draft done. And yes, occasionally there would be howls of anguish that I would make public on Twitter. and people, both writers and non-writers, would all very kindly, this is the intention was very kind, so I wouldn't get too cross about it, would say, just write it, just do the first draft. First draft doesn't have to be good, just has to be done. Just do it, just write it. And you're going, well, okay, you write what? I literally don't know. You write it. So it was odd, like what should be the fun bit, the liberating bit, where you can just go anywhere and you can make anything up, I found paralyzing to start with. Because it was such a different experience from the memoir, How Not to Be a Boy, that I wrote in 2017, was I'd given myself a very full synopsis of the rest of the book. I'd written the first 2 chapters before any publishers saw it, and there was a 50-page document about the rest, whereas this was literally the idea that you can put in 2 sentences, and the rest of it, was a question of, I spent that year wondering what would it be a satisfying without cheapening the whole the grief element, without nobody coming magically back to life. If anyone comes back to life, it's Kate. Without cheapening that element of it, what would be a satisfying ending? And then I thought about what would be an interesting thing to happen in the middle, and then it was a question of joining those things up, and it was really no more technical than that.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the people often say that writing is just as much about reading. So did you find when you were working on Come Again, did you find that you were reading more or less? Was there any anxiety about influencing what you were writing if you were reading something?
There was, yeah. No, I avoided fiction. I mean, I've become a bit a lazy and chaotic reader at the best of times anyway, but I was certainly, I was given an advanced copy of David Nicholls' Sweet Sorrow, for example, and I certainly kept away from that, because that's exactly the kind of thing that I would find myself accidentally pinching the odd phrase or the odd, without even knowing it. I mean, I'm well aware that writers can do that with no harm intended. So yes, I deliberately kept away from fiction, but I mean, it's such a long process. It's difficult to think of what I was reading. But yeah, no, I'm quite careful about that.
Yeah. Okay. And have you got plans for your next book, or indeed for Come Again? Is it likely to be made into a film or TV thing?
It is going to be, well, I don't know if it's going to be made, but it's been optioned to be made into a British TV series. So hopefully that will happen. I mean, obviously, when the making of TV programs does involve quite a lot of people standing around in very close proximity, so it's not going to happen anytime soon. But yeah, that is the plan.
Okay, great. And this is maybe a difficult question. You're dealing in Come Again with some very dark and difficult subjects, and you do so with a very light-hearted, deft humour. You're never actually sarcastic, but you have all the funny things that you get from sarcasm without being unkind. And it's funny. It's a lovely read. But I wonder, can you switch off your funny? Is that the voice that you will always write with, or do you switch it on and off?
It seems to be the natural way that I choose to communicate, although I'm giving myself an afternoon off today. But I mean, it's sort of how I always want to come at. The question is really, would anyone want me to? I mean, I suppose I've been doing it for so long, and it's very, as an actor and as a comedy sketch writer for such a long time now, that you sort of think, well, if I don't do that, what am I for? But it feels like writing books now is just the way that seems the obvious way for me to entertain people. I want to write something that is enjoyable. It doesn't need to win any, I mean, it's certainly not going to be longlisted for any prizes. It's there to reach out and just to communicate with people in a light way. But there again, as you say, death and brain tumors and all kinds of stuff comes up. But I've always felt that you can deal with heavy subjects in a humorous way. If it's a fit subject for drama, it's a fit subject for comedy. You just have to be careful how you do it. It's a question of making sure you've got the right ear for tone, and intellectually as well, to have a good idea of whose side is this joke on, what is this joke doing, who is it about, what what is it about? And if you can answer those questions, and you're pretty sure you're on the side of the angels, as it were, which is going to be a subjective thing, isn't it? But still, if you think you can defend it, then humour will reach places that solemnity won't always, and it becomes a very powerful tool to get under the reader's skin.
Absolutely. Well, they say that line between tragedy and comedy is a very narrow one. Do you have plans for another novel?
I have plans to write another novel. I'm not sure if I have plans in terms of what it contains. There is an inkling. I mean, a very dull sort of thing at the back of my. But there's a character that I'm thinking about. But and every day I think of things that I would like to put in a novel, a second novel. But there isn't a presiding premise or idea yet. There's a thought about a character, a male character this time, and but at the moment he's so ridiculous that I'd just be persecuting the poor man for 300 pages. So I need to think about his redeeming qualities.
So I suppose you started with the character with Come Again too, didn't you? I mean,
the idea, the time travel idea, and who it would involve kind of came at the same time, yeah. And I thought about, should I make life easier for myself and make it a male protagonist, because male authors can get into all sorts of trouble, as I'm sure you know, very quickly when they write female protagonists, and you end up writing shocking cliches. But I mean, I knew some of the obvious ones to avoid. At no point does she stand naked in front of a mirror and whimsically criticize her body. But I thought of making it changing the sex, and then actually, well, hang on, we've got this guy who in his head is 45, and he thinks his plan in 1992 is to chat up his future dead wife when she's 18, and suddenly it all tastes a bit.
It's a bit creepy.
It's just a bad flavour.
Yeah.
Whereas somehow it's not somehow. It's because of the imbalance of the sexes that it's kind of okay when Kate's pursuing a young man. So though Kate, a sort of bad-tempered, sarcastic widow. Came sort of part and parcel with the time travel idea.
So I guess you'll have to get to know this male character a bit better before you can actually get him on the page.
I think so.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been really lovely talking to you. To everyone listening to this, I highly recommend Come Again. It's published, as I said earlier, by Canongate, and I think you have signed copies at Waterstones. Is that right, Robert?
Yes, Waterstones and any independent bookshop will be able to order. There's a whole warehouse full of signed copies somewhere. So yes, Waterstones or an indie will send out a signed copy.
Well, fantastic. And I guess on the dreaded Amazon as well. Well, once again, on behalf of the Authors Club, thank you, Robert Webb, for joining us. Good luck with the book, and thank all of you for joining us too.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.